Some men from the American frontier left behind letters, photographs, court records, and detailed accounts of their lives. Others appear for a few violent years, leave their names scattered across newspaper columns and old recollections, and then disappear almost completely. Jack Watkins belongs to the latter. There is very little surviving information about the man who would become known as the Laramie Terror. Much of what remains is incomplete, contradictory, or mixed with stories repeated many years after the events occurred. But what information we do have is borderline legendary. For a few violent years, the name Jack Watkins carried real weight across the plains and railroad towns of Wyoming. He was remembered as a hunter, a railroad worker, a rancher, and one of the fastest gunmen of his time. Men who knew him claim he slept with a revolver in his hand and stood against the wall whenever he entered a saloon. One early Wyoming settler ranked Watkins alongside Wild Bill Hickok, Bat Masterson, Bill Tillman, and some of the most celebrated frontier figures of the era. Another account claimed Watkins could fire all 6 rounds from a Navy revolver into an area only 4 inches square, earning him a description that seemed almost made for the legend he became, a 2-legged Gatling gun. This is the story of Jack Watkins, the Laramie Terror. Well, let's get into it, shall we? My name's Steven, and welcome to Wild West Deep Dives. We do not know for certain where Jack Watkins was born or exactly when he came west. Even his real name is difficult to establish. At different times, he called himself John W. Watkins and Andrew J. Watkins, while friends and enemies simply knew him as Jack. The first official record we think we have comes from the 1870 United States Census. At the time, the settlements of Albany County, Wyoming Territory, were small and widely scattered. Only 32 men and 1 woman were counted there. One of those men identified himself as John W. Watkins. He gave his age as 28, listed Arkansas as his birthplace, and described his occupation simply as hunter. If the information was accurate, Watkins was born sometime around 1842. Only 1 year later, however, he gave a different account. In November of 1871, Watkins spoke with James H. Hayford, editor of the Laramie Daily Sentinel. This time, he identified himself as Andrew J. Watkins. He claimed he was 33 years old, had been born in Nashville, Tennessee, and arrived in Wyoming's Laramie Valley approximately 15 years earlier. According to that version, Watkins had been born around 1838 and had came west as early as 1856. So obviously, the two counts do not agree. It is possible that one of the records was inaccurate. It is possible Watkins gave vague or misleading answers because he did not want people looking too closely into his past. There's just simply no evidence proving that he was hiding from the law or escaping some earlier trouble. But from what it seems, he may have been into trouble that historians have not been able to attach to him yet. But this is just an assumption. The early accounts that can be followed with any sort of confidence place Watkins among the crews and settlements of the Union Pacific Railroad in 1867. That year, Cheyenne became the latest headquarters for the railroad's westward construction. As the tracks advanced, temporary communities appeared beside them, filled with laborers, merchants, gamblers, saloon owners, prostitutes, thieves, and gunmen. Cheyenne was one of the settlements remembered as a hell on wheels town. Jesse S. Hoy, who came west from Pennsylvania as a bullwhacker and later became a successful cattle rancher, spent time there during its earliest years. He remembered a rough settlement made up largely of saloons, dance halls, houses of prostitution, where killings were frequent. During the winter of 1867-68, Hoy shared sleeping quarters with Jack Watkins. By then, Watkins had already developed a reputation as a fast and accurate gunman. Hoy did not remember him as a man who bullied everyone around. He called Watkins a fighting man, but said his abilities attracted a mixture of jealousy, fear, admiration, and hatred. That reputation forced Watkins to remain constantly alert. According to Hoy, Watkins slept with one arm raised above his head and a 6-shooter in his hand. He slept so lightly that the sound of a rat moving through the room could bring him upright with a revolver pointed toward the noise. Inside a saloon, he normally stood with his back against the wall, watching for law officers, town toughs, and anyone who might want to test himself against a man already known for his ability with a gun. On the 19th of November, 1868, Jack Watkins became connected to one of the most violent incidents of the Union Pacific's construction period, the Bear River City Riot, a story that will likely be a future episode. Bear River City had grown rapidly as a supply point for railroad workers, miners, and travelers moving west. But on that November day, the vigilante lynching of a railroad worker accused of murder sparked an uprising that left 16 people dead and much of the town in flames. United States cavalry eventually arrived and imposed martial law, but the destruction had effectively ended Bear River City's future. The settlement was soon abandoned. Pioneer cattleman Ed Lemon later remembered Watkins as one of the leaders involved in the riot. At the time, Watkins was reportedly working as a commissary man for Coe & Carter, a railroad subcontracting firm, and was said to have led a group of railroad workers against an opposing force, commanded by Thomas Smith. Smith would later become known as Bear River Tom, and earn a reputation as a lawman in Kit Carson, Colorado, and Abilene, Kansas. The exact role Watkins played in the riot remains unclear, but the story surrounding his ability with a gun left a lasting impression. Lemon had first heard stories about Watkins when he was a 10-year-old boy in Cheyenne. Decades later, those stories remained strong enough that he ranked Watkins alongside Wild Bill Hickok, Bat Masterson, Bill Tillman, Texas Ranger Captain Bill McDonald, Jim Bridger, and Kit Carson. By 1870, Watkins was living in Albany County and working as a hunter. Early Wyoming residents remembered him supplying game to stations along the overland stage route. The Laramie Daily Sentinel described him as, quote, "Jack is a mighty hunter and has chased antelope all over the plains for half a generation. Few in the entire West can compare with him as a good shot with a rifle or revolver, or as a successful hunter." For a time, hunting appears to have been his primary occupation, but by 1871, that was beginning to change. Newspaper reports began accusing Watkins of leading a gang of horse thieves. He also became known for drunken sprees in Laramie and Cheyenne. When Watkins began drinking heavily, few officers appeared eager to confront him. During one of those incidents, he crossed paths with Nathaniel Boswell, the sheriff of Albany County. Boswell was visiting Cheyenne when Watkins began causing trouble in the city. Several Cheyenne officials asked him to help arrest the gunman before someone was killed. Boswell initially refused. He was outside Albany County and had no legal authority to make any arrest in Cheyenne. A federal judge quickly removed that obstacle. He ordered Boswell to raise his right hand, swore him in as a deputy United States Marshal, and instructed him to assist the local authorities. Boswell followed the disturbance into a darkened side street, where he found two armed men facing one another. He rushed forward, seized one of them from behind, and knocked the revolver from his hand. "You're under arrest, Watkins," Boswell announced. Then he turned the prisoner around. He had arrested a Cheyenne policeman. The other armed man was Jack Watkins. While Boswell realized his mistake, Watkins ran into a nearby store and Boswell immediately followed him. Inside, Watkins turned to face the lawman with his gun in his hands. Boswell leveled his own weapon and demanded that he surrender. Watkins agreed, but only after Boswell promised to protect him from the crowd growing outside. Boswell gave him his word. As the two men walked toward the jail, the crowd surged forward. Someone produced a rope, and men began calling for Watkins to be hanged. Boswell warned them that Watkins was his prisoner. If the mob attempted to take him, Boswell said he would return Watkins' guns, stand beside him, and help shoot down as many members of the crowd as they could. The threat ended the immediate danger. Boswell delivered Watkins safely to jail, and Watkins reportedly respected him from that day forward. But this encounter did not bring an end to Watkins' trouble with the law. In the fall of 1871, the Laramie Daily Sentinel reported that the town had been invaded by horse thieves, identified as members of the Jack Watkins gang. William Miles Hawley, sheriff of Carbon County, read the report and traveled to Laramie carrying warrants connected to 4 indictments against Watkins. On the 23rd of October 1871, Hawley arrested him. The Sentinel described Watkins as a terror to the country and warned that keeping such a desperate man confined would be difficult, and Hawley appeared to share that concern. He transported Watkins under heavy guard to Rawlins and placed him inside the Carbon County jail. Extra guards were assigned out of fear that Watkins might escape, or that members of his gang might attempt to free him. Officials later moved him to the better protected guardhouse at Fort Sanders, where he was placed under the authority of Church Howe, the United States Marshal for Wyoming Territory. Watkins remained there until he was transferred to the Albany County Jail in Laramie for trial. On the 13th of November, a jury heard evidence connected to the 4 indictments, and after deliberating for roughly a full day, the jurors cleared Watkins of 3 charges, but found him guilty on the 4th. The conviction involved an August 15th assault in which Watkins had attacked William Brower with a knife. He was found guilty of assault with intent to commit bodily harm. Despite the precautions surrounding his imprisonment, the judge sentenced Watkins to only a month in the Albany County Jail and imposed a $100 fine. While serving the sentence, Watkins was interviewed by James Hayford of the Daily Sentinel. Hayford described him as a strong example of the frontiersman, displaying the wild and reckless bravado associated with that life. The editor also believed Watkins was being treated more severely than his conviction justified. Although he was serving a short sentence for a relatively limited assault charge, Watkins had been heavily ironed and placed inside a dungeon. Hayford believed the prosecutors had what he called a wholesome dread of Watkins' abilities. His reputation had become as important as the crime for which he had been convicted. After his release, Watkins established a ranch near Wyoming Station, and for the next several years, he appears to have avoided serious violence and further clashes with the law. Then early in 1875, workers from a railroad tie cutting camp near James M. Sherrod's ranch on the Little Laramie River decided to hold a dance. The camp was approximately 20 miles from Laramie. The tie cutters brought in several women, a group of fiddlers, and a large supply of liquor. Men traveled from throughout the surrounding country to attend. Jack Watkins and James Sherrod were among them. But at some point during the night, a fight began. Sherrod later remembered that fistfights were rare at such gatherings. When tempers rose, men usually reached for guns or knives. Soon, shots began ringing through the camp. Watkins entered the fight and tried to fire his revolver, but the gun misfired. He tried again, and it misfired a second time. Then it failed for a third. According to Sherrod, Watkins said the gun had never done that before. While he struggled with the weapon, someone shot him in the hip. Watkins managed to get outside the line of fire and reached Sherrod's stable, where he crawled into a haystack. By morning, the other men noticed he was missing, but no one was eager to search the hay. Watkins was wounded, but everyone knew he was a deadly shot, and they feared that his revolver might be working again. Sherrod finally approached the haystack alone. Watkins was crawling out when he arrived. "Hello, Jack," Sherrod said. "You're not dead yet, are you?" "No," Watkins answered, "but I'm pretty well used up." Sherrod took Watkins into his house, dressed the wound, and allowed him to remain there until he recovered. Sherrod believed someone at the dance had tampered with the gun, hoping that Watkins would be killed once the fighting began. There is no way to prove exactly what had happened, but 3 consecutive misfires from a weapon Watkins trusted was suspicious enough that Sherrod remembered the possibility years later. Only a few months after the dance, Watkins returned to Laramie. This time, he would leave as a wanted fugitive. On the 24th of May, 1875, Jack Watkins rode into Laramie with a young ranch hand named Richard Rogers. The 2 men entered the Albany County courthouse, where Watkins intended to obtain a writ from Judge Ira Peace concerning possession of a horse. Watkins apparently did not know that Sheriff John R. Brophy was holding a warrant for his arrest over an earlier violation. Brophy and Deputy Lawrence Larry Fee cornered Watkins inside the courthouse and attempted to take him into custody. Watkins and Rogers drew their revolvers. Shots were fired at close range. One bullet creased Brophy across the lower abdomen. Another struck Fee in the leg behind the knee and hip, dropping him to the floor. Despite his wound, Brophy grappled with Rogers and managed to overpower him. Rogers continued to resist, forcing the officers to call courthouse employees to help escort him to jail. During the struggle, Watkins escaped from the building, mounted his horse, and raced out of Laramie. Nathaniel Boswell heard the gunfire and hurried to the courthouse. Now serving as Deputy U.S. Marshal, he quickly organized a posse that included Buck Brommel, J.W. Connor, and several other men. Even the wounded Larry Fee joined the pursuit. The posse began gaining on Watkins. According to an account Boswell later gave, the lawman eventually came within gunshot range. One of the pursuing men fired a long shot that knocked Watkins from his saddle. The bullet must have only grazed or lightly wounded him. Watkins climbed back on his horse and continued riding hard, and it forced the posse to eventually abandon the chase and return to Laramie without him. Wyoming authorities never captured Jack Watkins again. In Laramie, the shooting created immediate anger. Residents discussed reviving the vigilance committee that had operated during the town's early years. something we have talked about before on this podcast during the Big Steve Lawn episode. But some people wanted to seize Rogers from the jail and hang him before the trial could be held. Sheriff Brophy, despite being wounded in the shooting, helped prevent the mob from taking his prisoner. It was never clearly established whether Watkins or Rogers had fired the bullets that struck Brophy and Fee. Rogers was the man in custody, however, and prosecutors charged him with assault with intent to kill. On the 14th of August 1875, he was convicted and sentenced to 3 years in the Territorial Prison. A second jury later convicted him of larceny. Territorial Governor John M. Thayer eventually pardoned Rogers for both convictions. After serving 1 year, 7 months, and 17 days, he walked out of the prison in Laramie. There is no clear evidence that he ever rejoined Watkins, but just like Watkins would do in the future, Rogers disappeared from the surviving record. Immediately after the courthouse shooting, the Albany County Commissioners offered a $500 reward for Watkins' capture, roughly $15,000 today. Officers throughout southern Wyoming began watching for him. Members of the Rocky Mountain Detective Agency were especially interested in the reward. The agency was operated by David J. Cook, who also served as sheriff of Arapahoe County, Colorado Territory. Nathaniel Boswell was the agency's representative in Laramie. Late in August 1875, shortly after the trial of Richard Rogers, Cook sent word that Watkins had reportedly been seen near Denver. Boswell left immediately to join the search. Cook and Boswell followed reports placing Watkins in the pineries on the Divide. When they reached the area, they learned he had supposedly left approximately 2 weeks earlier. He was believed to be heading toward New Mexico with a drove of horses. Considering the accusations already surrounding Watkins, the Laramie Daily Sentinel could not resist questioning how many of those horses he had acquired legally. The report was the beginning of a series of sightings and accusations that followed Watkins over the next several years. In August 1876, a newspaper in Golden, Colorado, reported that he was riding with William F. Chambers, better known as Persimmon Bill. By 1877-78, stagecoaches traveling between Cheyenne and the Black Hills were being robbed with alarming frequency. The coaches carried passengers, United States mail, and valuable shipments moving between the railroad and the rapidly growing communities around Deadwood. In 1878, United States Postal Inspector John B. Fourrey traveled to Deadwood to investigate the robberies and theft of the mail. Fourrey concluded that several gangs were operating along the route. He named Persimmon Bill Chambers, Jackson Bishop, Frank Tolley, Jack Campbell, Tom Reed, and an unnamed deserter from the 3rd United States Cavalry as principal suspects. Fourrey also believed Jack Watkins and Big Nose George Parrott were involved. That placed Watkins among some of the better-known road agents operating in that region, but the surviving record does not connect him with any sort of certainty to a specific robbery. Another report from 1878 placed Watkins in a gang that included Clark Pelton, Robert Reddy McKemmy, and Bill Bevins. The article included an account attributed to Black Hills Sheriff Seth Bullock concerning the way certain outlaws handled their revolvers. Bullock said members of the gang practiced firing from the hip. The shooter held the revolver firmly against his side with one hand and rapidly struck the hammer with the other. The method allowed a man to draw and fire quickly without extending his arm. According to the report, Watkins became skilled at what became known as pistol fanning. Bullock said he was capable of firing all 6 rounds from a Navy revolver into a space only 4 inches square at long range. Watkins became known as a 2-legged Gatling gun. The accuracy of that exact shooting feat cannot be confirmed. It does, however, match the reputation Watkins had carried since the Union Pacific days. He was repeatedly remembered as a man whose handling of a revolver stood out even among other gunmen. Frontier newspapers did not always separate the men involved in those outlaw gangs accurately. At least one report confused Watkins with Reddy McKemmy and accused him of stealing from fellow bandits. According to that story, Jack Watkins identified as Reddy and a companion nicknamed Calamity Jane, not the Calamity Jane infamous to Deadwood fame, Martha Jane Cannery. This was a male outlaw with the same nickname, but he got Bill Bevins and 2 other stage robbers drunk before escaping with their stolen gold dust. The confused names make it difficult to determine whether Watkins had any involvement in the incident at all, but it is pretty safe to say it was not him. Years later, old-time Westerner Edgar Breacher Bronson wrote that Jack Watkins was one of the 2 most dangerous bandit leaders operating along the Deadwood to Cheyenne stage route. According to Bronson, any coach that escaped Watkins in the south was likely to encounter Duck Blackburn in the north. Bronson believed that shotgun messenger Daniel Boone May, my first ever episode, eventually hunted down both men and killed them. Duck Blackburn was not killed and secretly buried by Boone May. In November 1877, another messenger named Scott Davis tracked Blackburn for 14 days and approximately 400 miles before capturing him. Blackburn was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 10 years in prison. He remained there until his release in 1885. Because Bronson was wrong about Blackburn, his claim that Boone May also killed Watkins cannot be accepted without additional evidence, and in all the research I did on the life of Daniel Boone May, there is zero mention of any Watkins. Therefore, it is unlikely that Bronson's story is true. In fact, Watkins was most likely alive and working openly after the period in which Bronson believed he had disappeared. In late 1879, the Laramie Daily Sentinel reported that Watkins was in Colorado, hauling freight between Leadville and Gunnison. If this report is correct, the former hunter, rancher, and suspected stage robber had returned to legitimate work. After that, his trail becomes difficult to follow. In 1890, John N. Reynolds published The Twin Hells, a book describing his experience inside the Kansas and Missouri state penitentiaries. Reynolds mentioned an inmate named John Watkins, whom he described as one of the most notorious horse thieves in the Kansas penitentiary. That man had already completed a 3-year sentence in Missouri and was serving a 10-year term in Kansas. According to Reynolds, the prisoner had operated a horse theft ring from Kansas City. Horses were stolen around Omaha and Lincoln, and then sold through dealers in Omaha, St. Joseph, Atchison, Leavenworth, and Kansas City. The name and crime fit Jack Watkins' earlier reputation, but there is no proof that they were the same man. The prisoner could have been the fugitive from Laramie, or he could have been an entirely different horse thief named John Watkins. The final report concerning Jack Watkins appeared in 1894, on the 19th anniversary of the Albany County courthouse shooting. The Laramie Daily Sentinel claimed it was understood that Watkins had become a prosperous rancher in Mexico. According to the newspaper, he had settled down and become a steady citizen. There is no known record confirming that Watkins owned a ranch in Mexico. There is no certain date of death, burial place, or final account explaining what became of him. The man who appeared in the violent railroad settlements of Wyoming simply faded from view. Perhaps he was killed somewhere along the stage road, and the details were never recorded. Perhaps he served time under the name John Watkins in Missouri and Kansas. Perhaps he hauled freight through Colorado before crossing into Mexico and living out his final days as a rancher. All three stories are possible, but none can be proven. What remains is the outline of a man who lived through some of the most violent years of early Wyoming. Jack Watkins worked in the railroad camps, hunted across the plains, and earned a reputation as one of the fastest gunmen in the territory. He was linked to the Bear River City Riot, accused of leading horse thieves, arrested under heavy guard and confined in irons because authorities feared his ability to escape. He survived a bullet in the hip after his revolver failed him 3 times. He escaped a courthouse shooting, outran a posse, and remained beyond the reach of Wyoming lawmen for the rest of his known life. His name later appeared beside stagecoach robbers, outlaw leaders, and some of the most dangerous men traveling between Cheyenne and the Black Hills. Then the reports stopped. The Laramie Terror was gone. I hope you all enjoyed this episode on Jack Watkins. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and maybe subscribe. And if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you get your podcasts, please give a 5-star rating and review. I can't thank you all enough for all the support. Seeing how much this channel and podcast have grown is honestly surreal, and none of it would be possible without y'all. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. I'm getting closer to finishing the next deep dive. It is a big project, and I truly believe it is going to be a special one, but it is taking some time to put it together properly. I didn't want to leave y'all with nothing for an entire month while I worked on it, which is why I wanted to bring you this story. Once the new deep dive begins, it'll be released 1 episode a week. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, it doesn't change for you. But for my YouTube audience, this will be the first time I try a series, so hopefully it works. Join the Wild West Deep Dives family. For just $1 a month, you'll get access to bonus content like the first stagecoach robbery in US history. We will see y'all next time, and remember, when in doubt, shoot straight, shoot fast. God bless.